The most frustrating thing about this incident is how everyone views it in their own light. It's a lot like that controversial dress which changed colors depending on who you asked, except with audio confusion as well. I had never even heard of this angle before now. Democrats seemed to merely ignore the spoken words of Becca. Well, aside from the "we have whistles, they have guns" quote, which fits their narrative of being oppressed. It's frustrating not because there are liars, that's obviously going to happen. It's frustrating because even with incontrovertible evidence, it shows that it's impossible to reason with some. With many, actually. The left's lies are barely worth mentioning, as there's so many that they blot out the sun. I mean, people will say anything. They'll tell you he had this gun drawn the entire time, even though you can visibly see him draw it in the video. That he dove in front of the vehicle, even though her turning aided in pointing the vehicle at him. Or that her tires were turned to the right, as if vehicles can turn on a dime, as if he could even see the tires from where he was, or for that matter, if he would even be looking at them. As for the right wing, well, I have no idea why the right is claiming that she was trying to break some sort of ground speed record. You could determine the speed of the vehicle in the footage. I have no idea why the right is claiming that he was significantly wounded. You can see his feet and the vehicle's length and angle very clearly in the video prior to impact. If hit at all, he was barely clipped. He doesn't get knocked over, and he walks after the fleeing SUV for several steady steps in the video. Now, the right is saying he has internal bleeding. I suspect that internal bleeding is a bruise, one presumably caused by the car. The footage speaks for itself. The right wing doesn't need to sympathy bait or lie, as that just makes them indifferent from the far left. The footage shows them resisting arrest and accelerating towards the officer at the command of their wife, shouting, "Drive, baby, drive, drive." Ah, but did she really say that? There's an article on Yahoo by Frank Miele, which I think is how you say your name, that claims she didn't say "drive, baby, drive." It's a worthwhile argument to make because the audio isn't perfect, and I've only heard it from one source, which is the agent who recorded it, which could have theoretically been doctored. Plus, it was a new take to me, so I gave it a read. They make no mention of possible foul play, but they compare it to the hands up, don't shoot movement, a media narrative as they define it, regarding the shooting of Michael Brown by a policeman in 2014. Now, a comparison doesn't technically need to involve the government, a gun, or even death, but there's merit to the reference, considering it requires the media to spin it, which means that it needs to have some juicy drama attached to it for people to latch onto. In this particular case, a white officer was claimed to have murdered a surrendering black teenager, according to the progressive left. Eventually, many witness testimonies disproved this narrative, and the officer was vindicated as having no other option than to shoot him. There is, however, a rather significant flaw with this comparison. There's no recording at all. There's no visual or audio of the event itself transpiring. It was a he said, she said kind of scenario, leaving the media to spin their lies unabated. Miele claims it's the same this time around, and I disagree wholeheartedly. We have an actual recording with audio this time around, from multiple angles even.
What the Dude, what the Dude, you did a murder for what?
It's not the same. In fact, mass media's ability to spin narratives now is nearly irrelevant compared to 2014. Politicians themselves are the ones doing that now. There are networks set up brainwashing and recruiting people to be good little foot soldiers. Mass media these days convinces about as many people as religious text does. People in this era believe not through conditioning, but through a desire to belong to something they deem important. In any case, Miele states that the spoken words by Becca are more likely to be "do not drive," or the most likely, according to them, "don't drive," using their own ears and an audio analysis by ChatGPT as evidence. Well, listening to it, there is very clearly 4 utterances by a woman, all likely to be Becca. This rules out both alternative possibilities Miele has given right from the start, unless she repeats herself. But in one case that would be 6 words, so that's impossible. Repeating "don't drive" gives us 4 words, but it doesn't really match the audio at all. 3 of these utterances sound identical, which is generally believed to be the word "drive." Though I acquiesce that the final word is hard to discern, it's still reasonable to assume that it's a repeated word based on what you hear. Miele's inference both include the word drive, but not as the first word, despite the first word's most notable attribute being a high and long I sound, which don't and do not have, making it impossible to hear them as the first spoken word. Personally, I hear the word drive very decisively here. The initial D transitions clearly to an R and then to an I. Now, let's move on to the second word. Even if you don't hear the word baby, you can very clearly hear an A and an E enunciation in a female voice for this middle utterance. Neither of which would be present in the two alternatives Miele provides. Their AI claimed to have isolated the audio and could not detect the consonant bursts for the B's in baby, but the AI also claims that the audio is too short for 3 words. Which is rather odd considering that there are 4 words, and I can replicate exactly what she said in the same amount of time with my own mouth. Drive, baby, drive, drive! Suggesting whatever the AI analyzed was faulty from the start. As for the physical circumstance, well, considering Becca wasn't actually in the car, I would agree that it's weird for her to say. But if you pay attention, while Becca is shouting, you can clearly see that she's attempting to get into the car. I presume Miele to think that her physical actions coincide more with don't drive because she's not yet in the vehicle, but this would still be an incredibly bizarre thing for her to shout, as Renee would certainly have known this already, and it would still constitute resisting and fleeing, meaning that Becca would still be guilty of that. But, on the other hand, if this is a defense of Becca, then you'd have to think of it the other way. If Becca was telling Renee not to drive for the sake of surrendering to ICE, then why on earth would Becca be attempting to get into the vehicle with her wife, who is being told by federal agents to get out of the vehicle? The dismissal of these misheard lyrics seems to ironically come most solidly from her physical actions rather than her spoken word, as her getting into the vehicle while shouting "don't drive" is nonsensical. These protesting extremists literally treat this like a game. That's what you have to understand here. They treat it like ICE are NPCs that will drop aggro if they get far enough away, and from what I can see, this seems to have been their presumed state of mind. There are countless cop cams showing similar reactions, where people who are face-to-face with a cop make the decision to cheese it, and very quickly find out that they do not live in the world of Grand Theft Auto. I'd like to thoroughly continue, though, if you don't mind. Miele specifically mentions that they, both Miele and ChatGPT, cannot hear anything resembling the word baby, despite it being in the clearer parts of the video. Personally, I cannot hear anything but baby. The weird Thelma and Louise circumstances that they are in does polarize my brain to think that she's saying baby as opposed to maybe or wavy, but I think it's fair to assume, given the circumstances, that Becca was definitely not saying Davy. Miele goes on to state that Becca Good's exclamation in a moment of panic should not justify the officer's actions. Why not? I mean, other factors are definitely to be considered, but why is her exclamation exempt? I would even say her prior words, where she antagonized and insulted him, would lead him to believe her suddenly shouting "drive" to her wife the moment the vehicle is aimed at the officer would be the primary motivation behind him fearing for his life, as she clearly showed detest and anger to him beforehand. To begin with, they brought their dog. They were having fun. Less than 5 seconds after Renee was told to get out of the car, Becca shouts, and it doesn't matter what you believe she says, she shouted a commandment. Panicked people don't typically shout clear and concise orders without hesitation, so why would you assume she was panicked? And even if she was panicked, she randomly shouted an order to drive, as if signaling an ambush. It's reasonable that this would make the officer feel endangered, and that would justify their response. Of course, if your argument is that she didn't say drive, well, you're gonna have to prove that, and the audio does not agree with you. Miele then states that journalists and commentators repeating an unverified transcription as fact are doing more than simplifying a complex event. They are creating a moral narrative that can endanger real people. Right, sure, if it was a complex event, but it's not like Hands Up, Don't Shoot. We have video, we have audio, we don't need to even see it from CNN or Fox or wherever else. We can see it for ourselves and then come to our own conclusion. And there's nothing complex about what actually happened. They resisted arrest, they tried to drive away, and they would have run over the agent who wasn't expecting them to try and flee, had he not moved, and in doing so, he shot her thinking she was trying to kill him. likely because her wife, who had just antagonized and insulted him, was shouting "drive" right as the vehicle lined up with the agent. There are countless bald-faced lies about this video. The polls about whether or not people would agree with it are totally insane. I've talked to people in real life, and they speak on the subject with the acumen of Helen Keller. They clearly have either not watched it or watched it one time and claimed omniscience. People are too stupid to make up their own minds, so I'll agree with Miele here that the public narrative is very easily controlled by mass media, and people should be very careful about how they approach this. I hate polarization in the media, be it from influencers or mainstream news, or politicians for that matter, and I've been saying from the very beginning that she wasn't trying to run this officer over intentionally, and that if he got hit at all, he would have barely been clipped. I'm still sticking with that, despite these new claims of internal bruising, and I'm still sticking with this despite this new narrative of Becca Good's words. But here's the thing. This article is doing exactly as it's accusing others of. Miele is calling for other journalists, commentators, etc. to show restraint, but simultaneously playing the devil's advocate and putting out some theory that Becca said not to drive, throwing a life jacket to an angry mob that was already using blatant lies to justify their actions, is not restraint. The most bizarre thing of all is this preemptive double down, where Miele states that even if they're wrong about the spoken phrase, they're still right because the audio is ambiguous and shouldn't be used to justify calls for prosecution, which I assume they mean to say in defense of Becca Good. The audio isn't crystal clear, but it's disingenuous to say that it's ambiguous, as if it's completely inaudible, as if to make people second guess what everyone is hearing, and considering that everyone, including Becca, knows that everything they say can and will be used against them in a court of law, I do believe that it justifies calls for prosecution, especially considering the gravity of the outcome. And, well, here's the thing. There's another significant difference between this and Michael Brown. Becca isn't dead. She can defend herself. Well, moving on. Miele's book is titled The Media Matrix. What if everything you know is fake? And I'm sure there's worth to it, as these days more and more people are waking up to the truth of mass manipulation. Well, regarding the news anyway. For some reason, religion is picking up steam, and people are all too happy to board a train with a politician as a conductor. Still, I can't help but feel like this is Miele wanting to hear something different than everyone else. And I think everyone's guilty of that. Now, I think we should be careful in building life rafts for people who can see video evidence and still disbelieve their lying eyes, but just to throw a bone to Miele here, and this is going to sound a little unhinged, but for me, it's the final lyric of Aizen Sosuke's theme from Bleach, Treachery. I'm the only one on the planet who thinks the final lyric isn't "You're no good and you mean no good treacherously." And the reasoning is simple. All of the lyrics are exceptionally well crafted in every one of Shiro Sagisu's songs, at least the ones I've heard, which are many. So why would they rhyme good with good? Why would they be triply redundant, saying they aren't good twice and following that up by saying treacherously? The audio mixing is rough, and there's male and female opera singers overlapping, making it hard to discern. But in my mind, and only my mind, the lyric is, "You're no good, and you made your move treacherously." I've not used AI, but I've listened to it thousands of times, and it's impossible for me to say that I'm 100% correct. The audio is too harsh to be sure, but unless the author themselves said so, you'd never convince me otherwise, even though all three words that I hear, "made your move," are totally different from what everyone else hears, and has heard for the past 2 decades, which is "mean no good." Ironically, Treachery also has the lyric, "I can hear what you're hoping I want to hear." Alas, Miele, I cannot hear what you want me to hear. I cannot hear "do not drive."
Out of the car.
I cannot hear "don't drive."
Out of the car.
I cannot even hear "don't drive, don't drive."
Out of the car.
I can only hear "drive, baby, drive, drive."
Out of the car.
I'm not calling you a liar, and I'm not saying you don't believe your own words, as I still believe the lyric from Treachery is "made your move." But you did say people shouldn't be pushing narratives as you did so yourself, so I felt like a response was fair. Anyway, thanks for watching.
Take care now. Bye-bye then.